So welcome to the Academy for this afternoon's session on different visions of talent development. My name is Ben Lyttleton, and I'm delighted to be joined by some of the best practitioners in talent development from across Europe. We have Maria Ruiz de Oña, who's from Athletic Club de Bilbao. She's head of coaching development there, and as probably most of you know, Athletic Club de Bilbao is unique in football. They only select players from the local region, Basque players, which means there is more pressure on the coaches to develop the players. They're not a buying and a selling club. They develop their own talent. We have Ruben Jongkind, who is, well, used to be head of talent development at the Ajax Academy and now is in charge of Cruyff football. We have Bob Browaeys. Well, where do I start with Bob? How long have we got? He's technical coordinator of the Belgian FA. He's basically change agent for a football nation, a nation that is vastly overachieving for its population and its demographic. But he's also coach of a youth side as well, the under-16s. So he knows exactly what's going on the national level. And we have Steve Lawrence, who is actually an architect who designed the Ajax Youth Academy, but he also works with Ruben and Cruyff football. And Steve is going to kick us off with a short presentation about a key aspect of talent development. Thank you, and sorry for the long introduction. There are a lot of experts.
Okay. I'm going to stand up if that's okay, because I'll just find that a little bit easier. Can everybody see that? I'm going to go very fast through this, for which I apologise, but there's no alternative. I'm going to talk about relative age effects and what conclusions we can draw about talent development from that. I gave a presentation in Switzerland for UEFA back in January, and they gave me these figures. Now, these are relative age charts which you ought to be familiar with. And at the bottom here, it's split into quarters, and the bottom part of the chart is the first quarter of the year, then the second, then the third, and then the fourth quarter. And you can see that there's a predominance of early-born players in all of these cohorts. This was 2008 to 2012. Under 17s at the far end, then under 19s, women's under 17s, women's under 19s, and then the under 21s. In the next period, which is more recently, you'll see that there is no change in that bias. It's absolutely rock solid in the talent development system that we have. And if I then look at the large associations versus small associations, England, Spain, France, Germany, Italy, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Faroe Islands, Kazakhstan, and Latvia, you will see that in the bigger associations, the relative age bias is stronger. So the more competitive the league, the stronger the bias. Now, the reason that this happens is that we universally use this rule from FIFA down through UEFA, down through the associations. Players are eligible to play in the competition if they were born after a certain date. In England, in the home nations, we use 1st of September. Through the rest of Europe, we use 1st of January, and that's true around the world for the most part. And what that does is it sets this up. It means that these two potential players wind up in exactly the same cohort. So they're in competition with each other for participation and as they get older for a place in the higher level teams. So this image is important, and I hope that will remain with you, because we do this with our rule. Now, I've developed two really simple analytic tools. You saw the UEFA one split into quarters. I use something which I call a relative age index, which is very simply the percentage of players born January to June. And it converts into a simple integer. You should see up the left hand at the y-axis there, the relative age index. And along the bottom, the second metric I use is the average age of the cohort. That is the team, the squad, the league, whatever the competition might be. Every single team or competition has an average age. You can quite easily work it out. And what this chart shows is that there is a correlation between the age of the cohort and the relative age bias which we see evident. The red dots there are the Ajax Academy about 4 or 5 years ago. The blue and the green was an experiment that Ruben instigated around Amsterdam. 3,000 amateur club players were asked, the clubs were asked to make their selection teams. They chose the blue players and they rejected the green players. And they set up a relative age bias from which Ajax then chose the players that it was going to bring into their academy system. So those are the two main metrics I use. And recently I've done analysis, a big piece of analysis with a data set from the Dutch FA, about 8,500 matches, and then another data set from Infostrada, now Gracenote, of a further 7,000. So 15,000 matches across 64 competitions in those 2 years, from under 12 to adult, using the relative age index and the average team age, and two other things which I'm about to show you: a month of birth bar chart and an age curve. And I use, you'll see why in a minute. In that cohort of young Dutch players, 82,000 match participations produced this bias in the system, with the January borns at the left-hand end and the December borns at the right-hand end. And you'll see that R squared is 0.95 there. And then I use this is the age chart. You might have seen these beginning to show up. The relative age chart is on the top there, so you can see what that looks like. This is the Dutch under 17s during that period of time at the very highest level in the Eredivisie. In the background of that curve, you see the normalized profile that we would expect to see in any population, in any human population. And the point that I make here is that if we see a deviation from that normal profile, we know that the system is both biased and inefficient. And if it's inefficient, we create potential. So where the orange curve goes outside the normal curve, that means that we're spending time, energy, and resources on players who shouldn't be there. And where they're missing from the normal age curve, we're missing talented players who ought to be in the system but aren't. To show what it's like at a different level, the orange is the Eredivisie, the blue is the Eerste Divisie, which is the first division, and you can see they're slightly different profiles, but the bias exists at that second level too. And there's just some more. On the left-hand end there, the starting lineup players, you can see, are very biased. The second one is the players who sat on the bench, and you will immediately see the bump on the left-hand side means that there are younger players taken from the year down who are sat on the bench in those matches and given an opportunity there where the relatively younger players are not. Now, I use as a baseline for my calculations, which you're about to see, the home advantage. We all know what a home advantage is. We know that that calculations on match odds, for instance, the starting point is the home advantage. This is a study done by James Curley, who's at Columbia University. And he's established, this is the Premier League in the first division over 100 years. The home team will win 1.62 points per game. The away team will win 1.14 points per game. That is 100 years worth of football, and it is not going to change much. And it's not random. If it were random, 1.41 points per game is what we would see. If we now take my two metrics and compare them, on the right-hand side, that's the percentage of home wins in the cohort of the under 12s to under 19s of the Dutch data set. And points per game turns out at 1.53 for the home team, 1.29 for the away team. If we look at the older versus the younger team, the older team in those 5,700 matches earned 1.52 points, and the younger team earned 1.31. So it paid the coaches to put the older team on the field because they got 1.52 points for every match. And that means at the end of the season, they look like a better coach than the ones who got less. And on the left-hand end, that's a comparison of relative age bias using the relative age index. So the more biased team got 1.52 points per game, and the less biased team got 1.31 points per game. Average age is the driver of the relative age effect. Now, if we look at these, this 5,700 matches on an age basis, top left-hand side is the under 12s, and they get older coming down the left-hand side and then down the right-hand side. These leagues at the bottom are first-team matches. Well, they're adult matches. Now, if you look at the home and away, the pink, the red and the pink, the home advantage is constant through the age groups. It's there at under 12, and it's there in the adult game, as we might expect. If you look at the green and you look at the relative age bias, what happens to it? It starts out at 1.47 points per game, and it steadily reduces as the age is down to the adult game. And to the adult game, we don't see any bias in the Premier League or the World Cup. How am I doing for time? If those results are plotted on a more straightforward graph, the average, the line of randomness, the orange line there, is 1.41 points per game, and we want to see matches being played with random outcomes, because that's when we see the qualities of the players actually evident on the field. The green line, the relative age index, has an R squared of 0.83, which means that it's pretty solid. So, the concept of average team age. Can we make a rule which allows coaches to put a range of ages on the field, catering for the individual development trajectory, but which meets an average age requirement, creating the normalized team, the normalized curve that I showed you earlier, and within a multi-age environment? Well, I believe that we can. And we ran a pilot in Zeist. The KNVB ran a pilot, just 54 matches so far at Easter, and another pilot is starting in October. It's called Youth Plan Nederland, and it operates at just below the level of the professional clubs, and the purpose of the exercise is to discover players who have been missed by the professional system, but using an average age rule allows them to play at a competitive basis. And the rule says this: the squad may consist of 18 players whose combined average age is not older than 14 on a particular date, and the age difference between the oldest player and the youngest player may not be more than 2 years. Those are just examples. And what that does is it sets the mean age of the team, and we're seeing that in any case, and it defines the range of the team, so that, and both of those are completely adaptable. We can move that average age to whatever number we want, and we can control the range and make it tighter or wider depending on what our intentions are. And one of the things that we discovered in the initial pilot is that coaches were putting teams on the field against each other, meeting the average age rule, but with widely differing ranges. Some of them had very tight, narrow ranges. Some of them extended the ranges, so they had very old players with young players on the field at the same time. And my contention is that this is very, very interesting from a coaching point of view. Sorry that was so fast, but it had to be quite quick, and now it's for the experts to say what they think.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was interesting, and there was a lot of slides and a lot of information in a short amount of time. There's clearly, from what Steve says, and we can see now in the figures, a relative age bias in development football. Ruben, this is something we touched on yesterday in the Cruyff football chat with Jordi Cruyff and Wim Jonk. There's a difference between the team paradigm and the player paradigm. Can you explain why this relative age bias actually exists?
Yeah, well, I always start with the words of Johan Cruyff himself, and he said, "I've never seen a team making a debut. It's always the individual player who makes a debut." So it's very common sense, you know, but in reality it doesn't happen. The team paradigm, I call it like this, is the idea that all the resources, the organization, coaches, everybody is focused around the team in the youth academy. So the team is the central component of the organization. Whereas the player paradigm, you talk about a single player who is the central element of the organization. So what we just saw is that this team paradigm exists. It's not just some random abstract thing I just mentioned. And what Johan saw in the 80s, when he reformed the Ajax Academy, it existed back then. And why does it exist? Well, there are many reasons for this. But on the player level, it means that the best players who are the best today are being put on the field. The coaches are focused on winning. They want to win. And the organization bases their organization on all the teams because it's logistically easy. But what happens is that we are putting players there who will not make it to the best level later. And we are losing on quality, on players with high quality, which is a loss both to the game and financially. So the only way as a youth coach you can show that you are good, if you think about it in this way, how can you do it? Just by winning the game. And if you see that the economic incentive is also there, as a youth coach you earn a fraction of what you earn in professional football, that sets the stage for a development like this.
So the balance has to be very precise between getting results and the development. Maria, how do you manage that with the coaches at La Zama, which is the Bilbao Academy? How do you manage that balance?
Okay, this is a very hard process learning for coaches, because coaches came from a different environment. They train teams and they are focused on the results. But maybe nobody told them that there is other way to work with players. And we have to realize that for them is something new. And the first question that coaches need to ask themselves is what to develop players demand from us, and demand something different and something more. It's not enough my experience as a player, as a professional player. It's not enough my experience as a coach. We need something more. Yes. The most difficult point is to overcome the idea of to the result is something different. First, the organization need to do a reflection about what is success in this organization. And the head director and the organization has to have very clear this meaning, what is to win. Because the success in a club where the focus is the development of the player is different from other clubs. Then, in the day-by-day, that is very important, because when the coach is preparing the training session, is preparing the match, in that moment, it's important to have a conversation with him. In what are you thinking to prepare the match? What are your decisions? And the most important is to teach coaches the reflection post-match. Because sometimes the coaches always think that the player played bad, we have a bad performance, is something separate from him. And the coach needs to understand that the result, if we talk about development players, the results talk about my work as a coach. And we need to change a lot of paradigms. We need to change a lot of beliefs. And to change, when I change something, I lose something. And when I lose something, I need a grief, yes? I have to overcome a grief. And the case directors and the person who work with coaches, psychologists, need to go along with coaches all of this process.
So as the education of the coaches seems to be key in making sure that they understand that it's not just about results, but it is about the individual development. For you, Bob, is it different being in charge of national teams where there's just a different structure of competition formats?
Yeah, indeed, but I think as a coach of a national youth team, we also have to give the good example. But the problem is, you have European Championships, under 17, under 19, so there we are forced to win. And you can say, okay, maybe it's interesting that you can learn players how to win. Yeah. So for me, it's difficult. But does it mean for me exactly when we are playing friendly games, I try to give the same playing opportunity to all my players. For me as a youth coach, when you are a youth coach, you have 18 players, you have 20 players. For me, it's a principle of equality. So it's the right of the child to play. How can a player develop his qualities when he's sitting on the bench? It's impossible. So also, what Ruben said, are the players that we have in our national youth team when they are 15, 16, are the right players who will perform at a later age group. So it means we have to look for not the high performers, but the high potentials. And this is also the reason why we in Belgium in 2008 we decide to have a second team. We call it future team with late mature players. It's a little bit the same effect. So you have the relative age effect, but there is also from the age of 14 the problem of maturity. You can see it when take a picture of a class, 14, 15 years old, boys, girls, you see difference. Because some players, they start the puberty when they are 13 years old, other players when they are 15 years old. So there you see a very big difference. And late mature players, they are physically not so developed as early mature players. So it's an unequal battle. And this is also the reason why we as a federation, we put a lot of focus on late mature players, and it's a question of finding the right talent identification program in the federation, in the club, to focus on the right talent and not on the high performers.
It does seem unique to me that Belgium is the only national federation I know that is doing this division of late-born and early-born players, and for a small country are regulars in FIFA top 10 rankings, so I think there's some correlation, even though it's a small sample size. I mean, Maria, do you mitigate against relative age bias at athletic club as well?
Yes, of course. Of course. And we did a reflection about that, and we did a selection taking in account this idea. But the most important is to prepare the coach to deal with these kind of players. Because if we have done the recruitment and the coach doesn't understand the rhythm, the learning rhythm of the players, we make a mistake again. Yes. In that way, it's important how a coach needs to be realized about how to manage the training session. The coach needs to understand that each player is one project, and that is important. And each player needs some different information. And sometimes coaches give information to the player thinking in themselves, not thinking in the needs of the players. Yeah. And it's very important to create in the clubs spaces to reflection, to talk with coaches about their decisions, make conscious, make aware to coaches what they are doing for and why they are doing for something. Yeah. And for me, it's important to another thing more is when some player or one player make a mistake, this mistake is not only for the player. It's a feedback from the coach. The problems of the players are my limitations as a coach. Who tells the coach what does he needs to improve? It's the player. The player teaches us, tells us what do we need to improve as a coaches.
So this is becoming a mentoring relationship, not quite peer-to-peer, but the player is teaching the coach as well as the coach teaching the player, which kind of leads us to a more existential question. What is the role of a coach? Ruben, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, we when we worked at Plan Cruyff, Johan was a little bit more extreme even, because he said you have to flip everything over. Like the coach of the second team, he needs to go to the under 11, and then he needs to be there 3 months. Then he can see what happens when you're young and how important it is. And what we did at Ajax is we shifted the responsibility for the coach from the result on the Saturday to we gave him a batch of players of different ages. So instead of you're the under 17 coach, now you are the mentor of 12 players, age 16, 17 and 15. Maybe 3 15, 4 are 16 and 4 are 17. And your main responsibility is to get them to a higher level. Technically, tactically, physically, mentally. That's your main responsibility. Of course, you have a match on Saturday, but the match is more a tool to, like what we did, for example, with De Ligt. He played the European final last year against Manchester United. He played a good match. 17-year-old central defender. But we said, okay, central defense is too easy for him in the youth. Put him on the midfield. Yeah, and then the coach says, yeah, but he's a central defender. He can prevent the opponent from scoring. That's important for the result. Yeah, but it's important for him to improve his speed of action. These kind of decisions, you start to think about them when your responsibility changes from winning to development. So that's in our vision the role of the coach. To collect information, to have feedback with your player, but also with your peer colleagues, to speak together about one player, and not only one team, 1 year, but have collective responsibility for the development of each individual.
And it's a great example, that Ajax side, because they might well be the last side that have come through the Ajax Academy with the Cruyff plan, and that side was mainly built up of players that came through that system. And Jaro Riedewald had the same type of education, also played a year in a different position in midfield, didn't he? Bob, what do you see as the role of a coach?
It's about creating a very strong learning environment. It's up, like Maria said, to making mistakes. This is very important. Even you have to force players to make new mistakes, because making always old mistakes is also not good. So it means that he's not learning. So what we try to explain to our coaches in Belgium, that they have to explain how to play the most difficult football. So it means building up goalkeeper, defender, putting high pressure, but always it means that, for instance, 15 minutes before the end of the game, it's 1-0, you're winning 1-0, and the players, okay, they want to win, it's no problem, but then it's very important as a coach that you continue to coach on applying this principle. So often you see that the philosophy, the principles, they change because there is a pressure of the result, of now we can maybe win the game, so the defender, he will give long balls, so no risk. No, this is not what we want to see, because that's very important, that we focus on the individual. Youth football is like an individual sport. It's not a team sport, it's an individual sport. You have to make your players, all your players better, and not a team.
Maria?
I remember once we are playing against Barcelona, and Iker Muniain is going to hide with us, and he had one objective, because he needed to learn to manage his frustration, and he knew his objective, and when the rival pushed him and he get out and say, "Hey," and the coach told him, "Hey, come here and sit down." And the game is continued, but we were playing with one less player. The coach of the Barcelona told our coach, "Hey, you were one player less." Yes, I know. Our person in charge of recruitment was very nervous, because, oh my God, Iker Muniain is not going to hire with us. When finish the match, we lose the match. But we won a player. Because the parents saw this situation and understood that Iker needed to learn something if he want to be a professional person. Because if we develop professional players, but we don't develop the person, we will have a professional player, but we will not have a professional person. We need to understand that behind a player there is a person, and we cannot separate the development of the player or the development of the person. That for me is the most important.
And I think that's something that Athletic Club de Bilbao do exceptionally well. They have a link up with the University of Duestro, so every player that comes through the system has the opportunity to take a degree, and many of them go on to higher education. And speaking of education, Steve, there are clear links between the Cruyff football philosophy and another form of education.
Yes, there are. One of the special moments of my life was being present when my wife, who heads up the Montessori movement globally, actually met with Johann Cruyff, and it was just watching two minds coming together, and they just talked the same language, and it was fascinating. Now, the principles of Montessori education, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but they involve a prepared environment for learning. They involve highly trained guides rather than teachers, and they direct the progress of the children, and they understand the development trajectory of each individual child, and it's a multi-age environment. Now, the multi-age environment where peer-to-peer education goes on, for instance, it has great potential for what we're doing, and the project that Ruben brought into being at Ajax was a multi-age environment with exactly those principles. And indeed, the academic building, which I designed at the heart of the Ajax Academy, is a prepared environment, and it sits right in the middle of the academy, and it says to anyone who comes, academic education is important to us as a football club, and it's important for our players, because many of them will not become football players. And the third thing is the training of trainers program, because Montessori exists with a global training of trainers program at an extremely high level. You can't even get onto the training of trainers program until you've been a teacher for 7 years. Now, the training of trainers program is something that Ruben has taken on board, and it's one of the things that Cruyff football will do, and is already beginning to get going in a number of places around the world, actually. So there's philosophically there's a great deal of common ground.
Clearly clear links, and I think all coaches, their job is to improve individuals as people, players, and therefore they are educationalists. Now, we only have 5 minutes left, so there is an opportunity for anyone here to ask a question to any of the experts on the panel. So if there is, I think there's a roving mic. If anyone wants to ask a question, now is your chance.
No.
I thought you were going to ask a question. Okay,
I have a nice anecdote, maybe, to fill it up, to fill the
I have a
space up.
question.
Yeah. I remember there was, I think it was 2014 or 2015, there was Ajax and PSV under 19s. They ended up at the same points, so they had to play a decision game. But the decision game was after the season ended. So what happened? The best under 19 players, they had to move up to the second team. But the decision, the second team was already taking holiday, and those players, if you look at the player individually, he needs a holiday in order to be recovered for the next year. That's an individual thinking mindset. But the coach, he had to play this game still to become champion of Holland. And he was like, yeah, but you cannot leave these players to go on a holiday. I need them for the match. And then he came to Wim and me and he said, can't they stay for a week longer? And we said, no, they need the holiday, come on. So we have to look at what's coming next, the under-17s. Okay, those are your players. But now the question is, what do you tell them? Difficult. Okay, tell them, this is your opportunity. If you lose, everybody understands. But if you win, you're the heroes of the club. So they play. PSV had the best squad. 2 years age difference almost. 3-2 for Ajax. So that was, if they had lost, we had been in trouble, of course. Yeah. But it was a risk, but it ended well. But this is a very nice anecdote to show the difference between thinking about players and thinking about teams.
That's a perfect way to end, I think. So thank you very much, Ruben, Bob, Maria, and Stephen. Thanks for listening.